The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod, and I feel so lucky and privileged to be able to be with you here today, and especially for some of the things that we're going to talk about today, which I'll get to in just a second. But want to welcome you here. We're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We adore interaction. And I want to say this from the jump for this episode, even when you don't agree with me, we adore interaction. So feel free to be writing in on any of those sites, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. I will be able to see it in real time. Good morning to Susie. See how that worked? I'm able to see what you guys write in and respond back. I'm able to answer questions, able to answer criticism, able to accept criticism. Happy to do all of that with you this morning. And I also want to say that the show will be available as a podcast wherever you download podcasts. It's a free download to you. I love that we've been doing this now. We're in our 14th year, and you are able to download it for free. There is a cost for that, but we defray that cost with sponsors and with advertising. And so when you get the podcast, you will have regular advertisement that goes in between things. Please embrace that, because that's why it is free to you. If you really hate it and you really want to get the podcast and you don't want to get the ads, you absolutely can do that. It's a small monthly fee. We found a company that would do that. We shopped around to see who could do it for the least amount of money and do it responsibly. And you can go to glow.fm/Autism Live. Now, here's the good news about this. It's $5 a month, but if you want to pay for it for the whole year, it's actually less than $5 a month. And you not only get Autism Live with that, you get Ask Dr. Doreen. Otherwise, they're completely separate podcasts, but for that, you get them both for the same low monthly fee. But if you don't want to pay a monthly fee, which I appreciate, then please listen to the podcast and you know, when the ads play, listen to them in groove and go, these people are making it so that I don't have to pay to be able to listen to this information. What else did I want to say? I feel like I've left something important out. We do have this robust YouTube channel that has all the videos and highlights from the videos from the last 13 and a half years. As I said, we're in our 14th year. So if you want to see sound and picture, we try to make it at least interesting for you guys to be able to watch. I always say I have a face for radio, but if you want to see like the presentation that we're going to do today, please feel free to check out our YouTube channel. We always encourage you to, if you like something, like it, share it, let other people know, review us, subscribe on whatever platform you're on. It only helps us to stay on the air. And if you can tell someone else about it, then it helps them to find the resources too. Please, you know, in the search bar on our YouTube channel, look up things that you're interested in and you will see a crazy amount of content. Almost 14 full years worth of it. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm excited today to be talking about a really specific topic that I was asked to cover. Somebody said, you know, it's been a really long time since you've gone through the ABA basics. Now, there's so many disclaimers I want to give as we start this. First of all, I'm not an expert in autism. I am not an expert in ABA, but I've spent a long time in the field of ABA, first as a pony, a proud pony. I'm always a proud pony, which is a parent of a neurodiverse individual. And then I've been hosting shows and interviewing experts and going to centers, watching things, learning, working with Dr. Grant-Pichet. I'm not an expert, but I'm also not new. And I think I've seen about as much ABA as a person can see and not be a behavior technician or a BCBA. I'm okay if you want to argue that with me, but I've seen a lot of ABA over the last 19 years. I had it going on in my house, and I watched on a monitor for 5 straight years. So I feel like as a parent, I can talk effectively about ABA in a way that is not all sciencey jargony, I hope, for you to help people to understand what ABA is and what it isn't, because it's a very confusing little science, and I feel like it needs a new PR person, and not that I'm nominating myself, but I feel that it needs a new PR person. There will be some of you who will be watching the show today who are very anti-ABA, and I want to tell you I'm okay with that. There will be some of you who will be watching and will have negative things to say about ABA, and I want you to know that I champion you as well. That if you have had the experience of having a negative experience with ABA, I in no way want to disavow that. But to me, it's like talking about two things that are potentially different. And the example that I like to give when I'm speaking to a big group of people, I will say to them, let me ask you a question. Raise your hand, how many of you have ever been in public school and had a really negative experience with a teacher? Like something that still lives with you because it was either traumatic or borderline traumatic. And I say, just raise your hand if you feel like that identifies you. One or more experience of this with a teacher in public school, everyone raises their hand. I mean, literally everybody raises their hand and says, yeah, I've had a negative experience. And my heart aches when I hear that. But my question is, why have we not said, well, let's stop that. Let's stop public school, let's forget it, let's slide the entire education system into the ocean if we know that there are things that are happening. And I think, and write in and tell me what you think, but I think it's because we understand that that was a bad teacher, that education is not bad. That was a bad teacher who should not have been teaching. And none of us are condoning it. None of us think it's okay. But those of us who've been through public education understand that that was not the whole experience and that that was not what the experience was meant to be. That was a person who was, you know, a megalomaniac, power hungry, whatever their deal was, but they were bad at their job. And I think most of us we understand that other good things happened while we were in public school, and so we don't want to abolish the entire system. Do we want an overhaul? Yes, I think we all want an overhaul of public education, but we don't want to throw the whole bathwater out because we understand that education is important and that there have been, you know, new things and new ways of training people so that hopefully we get the right people in the job to uplift and you know, ignite hearts and minds to be able to learn. Isn't that what we all want from public school? And here's the thing, you know, ABA, it's this thing that if it's not a part of your life, then you don't get to see it. It's not like you walk down the street and somebody goes, hey, we're doing ABA here, right? That's not how it goes. So I think it's important to educate people about what ABA is, what it isn't, but again, willing to talk about criticism. But if you'll watch and hear what ABA is meant to do and how it's supposed to be, if you have concerns, I really want to talk about them. I feel very passionate about this, especially because when my son was diagnosed with autism and I asked, what can I possibly do to help my child? And the developmental pediatrician who was diagnosing him basically told me there was nothing to do. She said, take him home and enjoy him. And I said, well, I've been Googling a lot. There's this AB whatever thing that I believe helps kids to be able to talk. My son was talking. I would like for him to talk again, if at all possible. And like a lot of parents, you know, that feels like, oh, I would like that for him if possible. And she very firmly told me not to do ABA. And she had very terrible things to say about ABA, enough so that I refused ABA for a good solid 6 months, even though it was being offered to me by the state of California. Then I saw ABA done in the way that I'm going to talk about it, and I went, oh no, I've been saying no to something that would really help my child be able to talk. And we began doing really good quality ABA, and my son began to talk again and continue to talk and learn and grow. And I really love and enjoy the experience that we had with ABA. It's what I want for all of you, and I know it's not where all of you are. But I feel like if I can educate you as to what it is, then you know what to look for and what to say, hey, that's not good ABA. That's not even ABA. You know, you're charging me for something and you're not doing it right. And more importantly, to protect individuals on the spectrum so that they aren't with people who are doing really redonkulous things and calling it ABA. I get upset about it because it's important. We want to protect our children. We don't want to send them to school with somebody who is doing bad things. We don't want them doing ABA with somebody who's doing bad things. And I said when my son started ABA, I don't want anybody to take away his self-esteem. I will not have him tortured. I will not have him overwhelmed, right? And those things did not happen. So, what does that look like? I want to go through the basics, and then feel free to ask questions whenever you want. Okay, so let's get started. So why ABA? You know, a lot of you have funding right now. If you're in the United States, you for sure have funding for ABA one way or the other. And people go, why has this become such a big, big deal? Why is ABA the treatment for autism now? Well, I mean, first of all, because it works. ABA as a science is wildly thought to be and accepted in the scientific community to be the most effective and efficient way of teaching anything to anyone, not just autism. That if, you know, Olympic athletes are trained with the principles of ABA. Fortune 500 companies use the principles of ABA to not only train their employees, but to get the best performance out of their employees and have them be happy and for them to retain those good employees that they've trained. One of the things that I always like to say to parents is, in the last, I guess it's been like around 13 years, insurance started to pay for ABA. And that's really the question. Why did insurance start to pay for ABA? Because for so long, ABA was not funded by insurance because insurance said, we don't have to pay for something that isn't effective. But more and more studies came out and showed that it was effective to the point where insurance companies were being sued and were losing in court because there was evidence that it was effective. So that is why insurance pays for it. And you know, if you know insurance, they aren't going to pay for something that's not effective. I need you to full screen it, Chris, because my eyes are not with me this morning. But another good thing about ABA is that it's very specific to the individual and specific to the goals that you're doing. So done properly, it's going to take into consideration this individual, their sensory needs, the way in which they learn, the rate at which they learn, very specific. And it is done correctly, it is the most effective teaching tool. And the biggest reason why we all do ABA is because it's effective. It works. We talk about FAPE sometimes, free appropriate public education, which is what you're owed at school. And when I talk about appropriate, I know you can look it up in many dictionaries and it says many things, but the one that I love is the dictionary that says it's effective, right? That whatever they're doing at school has to be effective. As a parent, I wanted my son to be able to learn. I wanted his thoughts and his feelings and his particular concerns to be taken into consideration, but I wanted him to learn, and ABA works. So that's why you are given funding for ABA, because it works. So now let's go on to the next slide, Chris. Okay, how did we first find out that it worked for autism? Because ABA is a very old science that, like I said, was being used for lots of different things, is still being used for lots of things. As big as ABA for autism is, do you realize it's still only about 50% of the field of ABA is autism? And the rest of it is corporate and institutions and trainers and athletes and lots of different things. So when and how did it get used for autism? So Ivar Lovaas was a researcher and an educator, and he had this thought and believed that the principles of ABA could be effective with individuals on the spectrum. He did one study first, and he lost his funding for that, and it was with kids that were a little bit older. And they made progress, but once the therapy stopped, they didn't retain a lot of their progress. This did not deter him. He got more funding, and he said, I think I'd like to start earlier when the kids' brains are a little bit more plastic. And I'd like to have funding for a few more years. So he got funding to work with children that were ages 2 to 5 for 40 hours a week for a 2 to 4 year period. Now here's something that's really exciting. He was working with a group of young UCLA students who were there in their undergraduate and the master's program who became the people who did the most of the work with the kiddos, right? He was directing the research, but one of the lead investigators, the people working with the kiddos, was Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. That's where she was going to school. That was when she was a college student at UCLA, walked into one of his classes, thought that what he was talking about was really interesting, and he said, I'm looking for people to be a part of this team, and she was part of the team. What's crazy to think of is that from those initial investigators, I believe that she is the last one left living, because Tris Smith is no longer living and neither is Ivar Lovaas. We've lost both of them in the last decade. Now, but Dr. Granpeesheh is a great resource to talk about what did they do during the study, because this was the seminal study. It was published in 1987, and basically it showed that of the kids that were included in the study, when the study was done, they fell into 3 distinct groups. That 47% of the kids within that 2 to 4 year period, if they had 40 hours of therapy, were virtually indistinguishable from their peers when they were done and graduated. They went to independent clinicians and no longer qualified for an autism diagnosis. They literally lost their diagnosis. And those kiddos needed no future support in their lives. And some of these kiddos, you know, they've followed back up with them, continue to be leading these wonderful lives, don't need support. That was 47% of the kids, almost half. There had never been a study before that showed any kind of significant uptick in terms of skills or anything. And here was this study, and it showed that almost half of the kids no longer qualified for a diagnosis. Now, 32% of the kids made significant progress. They still qualified for their diagnosis at the end, but with supports, they were very successful. Worked jobs, some of them got married. They lived productive lives, but in each case, they would need a different level of support for different things. But many of them lived independently. It was not a bad category to be in. Then 11% of the kids made meaningful progress, but most of their progress was made in adaptive skills, things like toileting, dressing themselves, being able to shower by themselves. All of them gained functional communication. Not all of the kids in this study were vocal in terms of speech, but every single kid in this group was able to communicate through some method, whether it was using a Dynavox, they didn't have iPads back then, or a picture exchange. They were able to communicate their needs. But this group of people continued to need significant support. This group of people, a lot of them had dual diagnosis, that perhaps they not only had a diagnosis of autism, but they had an intellectual disability. They could be Down syndrome. I used to feel bad for this group and think, oh, what must it have been like for the parents in that group? And then I met some of them. And you know what they said to me? They were like, oh no, we were so appreciative. This person is a part of our life now. We can have conversation with them. You know, they set the table every night. They work a job, but they have to have support at the job. And we know that they're going to need to live with us and that we're going to need to make arrangements for them to live with somebody later on. But they are happier and we understand them better and we can help them to get their needs met better. They were thrilled in this category. But I think generally people look at this, and parents anyway look at this and go, I'd like to be in the 47% category. How do I get myself in the 47% category? Now this study came out in 1987 and it caused a stir. And people from all over the world came to LA and said, how do I get my kid into this study? Like right around 88, 89, Dr. Granpeesheh was graduating and leaving the graduate program, and the way she tells it, she wasn't entirely sure what she was going to do, and Lovaas said to her, go open an office, and I can't handle all of these kids, I'll send some to you. So she left and started taking clients, and that became CARD. But let's remember that at this point, nobody was funding this. Nobody. If you were a parent, you had to pay out of pocket, and imagine it's 40 hours a week, And, it's not inexpensive. Somebody has to sit with you one-to-one, and it has to be somebody who's trained at a pretty high level. This was only for parents who had bank, right? But parents were showing up and paying for this because there was no other hope. Now, very gradually, studies started to be done that replicated the circumstances around this. Imagine 2 to 4 years and 40 hours. You have to have people who can fund that, and you have to find the kids. That wasn't the hard part because parents were begging and pleading. But study after study began to replicate that, yes, and almost always the numbers are very close to being the same. Somewhere in the 40s for kids who no longer have the diagnosis, somewhere in the 30s, and around 9 to 10 for the kids who made the substantive progress with adaptive skills. But I always like to point out a couple of things here. First of all, this study and the replicated studies that showed that, yes, it wasn't just Lovaas, he wasn't magic, it wasn't just the team that was, Tris Smith and Dr. Granpeesheh, they could do this in other clinics and they got about the same results. But a couple of things here that were the same whenever they replicated. And they tried replicating it with different things, but the replication came when the kids were 2 to 5 and when they had 40 hours a week. If you talk to Dr. Granpeesheh, she says that's misleading because it wasn't really 40 hours a week. What it was that they were saying every waking hour. But at the clinic, they were doing it professionally for 40 hours and training the parents to be able to do it in every other waking hour. Now, a lot of that seems to have gotten lost in the translation as we've had insurance. And I'd like to ask all of you who are intelligent why you think that might be. Because now it is the common thing for insurance to say, oh, we'll give a 4-year-old 10 hours. It tears my ticket. It makes me want to lay down on the floor and sob and kick and scream and light my hair on fire. I don't know what else. Because that's not what the science showed. And if parents don't know to push, if your child is in that window of 2 to 5, you absolutely have the right to push your insurance to give you a 40-hour program and pay for it for at least 2 to 4 years. The studies are there. They will tell you no, and if you push, I don't know a single parent that has pushed that hasn't gotten it. The field is a little bit messed up right now, so I don't know about in this moment, but I know if I were you, I would push to get this. Because I believe that you can, because the studies are there. The studies are absolutely there that this is what is effective, and your child deserves that. Where it gets dicey is after the age of 5. After the age of 5, the studies are not there to show that that intensity is the ticket. Now, do we have anecdotal evidence? Sure, but nobody has been able to get the funding to do that study. So after your child turns 6, you will see that insurance will start to wheedle down the number of hours that you have. It's just so upsetting to me. But this is the study that pointed to everything. I just need you to know that it was replicated many, many times. If you have a 2 to 5-year-old and your child is not getting 40 hours, then you are not in what I call the window. You want to be in the window. For sure, there are some studies that showed between 25 and 40 hours. And what I now say to parents is every waking hour. Every waking hour, how many of those hours can you do, and how many of those hours would you like an expert to do? If you fight for 40, you should be able to get it. Call me, email me, and I'm happy to help you to figure out how to fight your insurance company to get that. When your kids are older, it is harder, but it's still worth the fight to fight for it. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. A lot of you might be looking at that and going, oh no, we're too late. My child is 7, 8, 18, 34, right? I want to let you know, no, you're not too late. ABA is still effective at teaching your child, teen, or adult. It's still effective with senior citizens, right? It's still effective with Olympic athletes. But it does mean that there is a period of time that when your child wasn't at school, when you had a lot more time and a lot more plasticity, so often children can learn faster and they don't have as much to catch up on, right? They're not behind on as many skills. If you have an 8-year-old, they're that many further years behind, and you have to contend with school. It doesn't mean that they can't learn. It just means that you've got lots of warring factors, which means you've got to make every moment count. Whatever age your child is, you've got to make every moment count to help them to get to that educationally enriched environment. And we're going to talk more about that. Let's go on to the next slide. So what is ABA? ABA is a method of teaching. That's what it is. It is a method of teaching. It says on the very basic level that everything you do, everything I do, we do for a reason. Because at some point it worked. And it may not have worked efficiently, but at some point the thing I was doing worked. So I'm going to keep doing it that way. But the basic premise of ABA is that if a person is giving meaningful rewards, that they will be willing to learn new behaviors that are slightly different than what they were doing before, that eventually they might discover, hey, I like this better, right? But that it has to be based on that it's rewarding to me to do it. So when people tell me that they were traumatized by ABA, this is why I go, oh, somebody wasn't doing right. Because the whole thing is based on being rewarded, not being punished. So if somebody is being punished, this is not the ticket. Now, I do want to give the disclaimer that this is a really complex science. It's basically a toolbox. There are so many different tools that can be used in many different ways. And ABA experts will be like, well, you really simplified it here, saying it's a method of teaching. Yeah, but it's true. It's a method of teaching. But there's a whole thing about the application of the principles, meaningful outcomes, blah, blah, blah. It's on the screen. This particular presentation, though, we're going to stop talking about everything else and talk about how you use ABA to get to good outcomes for autism. Because now you know it's not just used for autism, but now we're going to talk specifically about autism. I also want to say that if you are writing in and telling me about microdosing psilocybin, we are going to block you. This is not the place for you to advertise. So please stop that. I'm not interested in that. And please don't click on anything that somebody puts there. That is spam. It makes me angry. Stop it. I'm also saying good morning to Anna and to Rodney and to Uma. So thrilled that you're here. We do not advise psilocybin, and we are not, and I will get that removed, that comment. And if you do it again, you'll be blocked. There we go. Watch my head come off and fly around the room. Okay, so let's talk about behavior, because I love talking about behavior. There's all kinds of behavior. I'm engaging in behavior right now. You're engaging in behavior right now. Our kids are constantly engaging in behavior, and guess what? All behavior is communication. When I ask you guys, what do you want more than anything else for your kiddos? One of the first things that you say is, I want my child to be able to communicate. A lot of times you'll say, I want my child to be able to talk. I want my child to be able to talk to me. I want to be able to talk to my child and for my child to understand me. That's all communication. Communication is behavior. Behavior is communication. So when your child is behaving in ways that you don't understand, one of the first things that we want to do is take the fear and move it to the side and go, hey, that's communication. My child is throwing a tantrum right now. What are they trying to communicate to me? Instead of being afraid, oh no, I don't know what they want, and is this going to be the rest of my life, right? Or, you know, everybody's going to think things about them that I don't want them to think, right? People are going to think that my child is odd or different or weird, right? And that hurts our heart. But if we just will stop and take all that fear and go, please step to the side and just look at the behavior. And what we said we wanted was communication. We are getting communication. It's not really wildly effective, maybe, and it's maybe not what we hope for them for the future, but let's just baseline go, that's communication. Let me see if I can get in there and see what that communication is trying to say. Because communication can change, behavior can change, all of it can change, but it's not just about individuals on the autism spectrum changing their behavior. It's about us changing our behavior too, that we can start to listen to how they are communicating and key into that. And that's a really critical part of ABA too, that we have to be listening and we have to change our behavior. And what we will see along the way is sometimes our behavior is sending a message to an individual on the spectrum saying, the only way that you can communicate with me is by throwing yourself on the floor. I know that seems impossible, but let me assure you, I was doing it. So it's possible that you're doing it now, but I know for sure that I was doing it. So let's go on to the next slide. Let me ask you a question. How do babies communicate? What do? Babies come out and they're not talking. How do they let us know what they want? They cry. It's very normal that they cry and they fuss and they kick their arms and legs. And what do we do? Because we can't say to them, what are you trying to say to me? But we try to figure out, what does that cry mean? And now they say that, you can listen to your babies cry, and if they cry a certain way, it means I'm hungry. If they cry another way, it means my diaper is wet. Another way, they're hot or cold. Another way that they have gas. I couldn't figure that out when my son was little. They were just coming out with that, and I couldn't figure out what the different cries were. But I knew it was probably one of those things, right? So what would I do as a mom? If he cried, I picked him up, and I bounced him. And if he stopped crying, then I knew he was gassy, right? Or if I picked him up and I snuggled him and I put a blanket around him and he kind of snuggled in and then now he's quiet, well, he was cold, right? Or if I could see that he was hot in the summer and I would take off a layer and wipe off his head and he would be happy, right? So you just try things to see which thing gets them the thing they want. But what the child is learning, they're making all these connections in their brain and they're like, I cried, you helped me. It's very normal, right? Let's go on to the next slide. Does it work? Yes. We're very responsive to the cry. We get up and we do something for them because they cried. They are communicating, we are listening. And what we're telling them is, if you need something, all you have to do is cry. We're not wrong doing that. We're good parents. We're listening to our kids. But does that ever change? And why does it change? It does change. Because as their brains start to grow and they make connections and they're hearing us use words in a typical development for a child, they're very keyed into mouths and eyes, and they start to pick up these sounds and they start approximating words and they start to realize there might be a quicker way to get what I want than crying. And they attempt to talk, but they're not successful at it. This is typically developing kids. They attempt to talk and they're not successful, and that makes them mad. And they throw a tantrum. And we call this the terrible twos. They've seen there's a better way of communicating, but they can't get it. They say, blah, 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 and you didn't understand, that means I want a cookie, right? So they didn't get what they wanted from it, and it makes them mad. Terrible twos. And the way we get them out of the terrible twos is we get them to communicate effectively so that they can get what they want. So what happens when our kiddos aren't keyed into eyes and mouths and aren't differentiating the sounds and not picking up those things? Well, a couple of things. They continue to cry and fuss like they did as a baby because it worked. If I cry and fuss, somebody will listen to me because it worked, right? But we haven't moved on to the next phase. And some of our kids will attempt language and they're not successful, and it might be overwhelming to them because sounds don't sound in a way that they can pick out the sounds. So now they're throwing tantrums. And if the tantrums, doesn't matter if you're a typical child or if you're a child on the spectrum, if you tantrum and get what you want, it works. Why would you change it? Why would you do anything else? So part of what ABA says is we are stuck in a loop that no longer serves this individual. Let's change it up. Let's go on to the next slide. So ABA says that the ABCs of behavior, that in every behavior you do and I do, there are three components to it. They call this the three-term contingency. I call it the ABCs of behavior because I can remember it. The first part is an antecedent. I don't know about you, but I'd never heard the word antecedent before, didn't know what it was. Antecedent simply means what happened before. Then there's the behavior. Okay, I know what a behavior is, but it's very interesting to think of behavior as what does it look like, and they call it the topography of the behavior. What does it look like? How long does it last? So on and so forth. But then there's the consequence. What happens as a result of the behavior? Everything that you do, everything that I do has this. We just don't think about it this way. But if you do start to think about it this way, all kinds of things can happen. So let's go on to the next slide. Let's think about it this way, because as I said, we all engage in this every single day. You do this every single day. At some point, you're sitting in a room, and you either walk in the room or you're sitting in the room, and the light changes, right? And so you get up and you turn on the light bulb, and there is a consequence. So let's go back to the ABCs. What happened? You didn't have enough light in the room, and your eyes were starting to strain, and it could be different for you than it is for the person sitting next to you, right? But something happened that created enough of an impetus for you to get up and turn the light on. So the behavior was you turned on the light. What was the consequence? Light flooded the room. You were rewarded for it. You got what you wanted. You got to be able to see. Now, are you more likely to do that again if you are having trouble seeing in the dark? Yeah. And the more you do that, at a certain point, it just becomes automatic, right? It's just a behavior you engage in because your body and your brain know it's dark. I'm going to go over to the light switch. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to get light in the room. We're all doing this all day long. So go ahead on to the, so there it is. It was getting dark. You turned on the light switch. The consequence was there was more likely the light in the room. So will you be more likely to do it again? Absolutely. And let's go on to the next slide. So ABA as a teaching tool says, let's play with that 3-term contingency, and we can change all kinds of things, and I'm getting ahead of myself. But we can help to create behaviors, if we give them a reward, that go up. For instance, we can increase language and communication by making it rewarding. If you're more likely to get the thing that you wanted when you asked for it, you will be more likely to keep asking for it. So we can increase that behavior. We can teach safety skills. We can teach social skills. We can teach building coping skills. All of those things, we can increase those behaviors by working those ABCs. We can also reduce challenging behaviors, because if I figure out what you want and give you a way to get it that's effective without throwing a tantrum, you will be more likely to do it. And we see, and I think it's on the next slide, we see this amazing thing that happens often in ABA, that as you teach communication skills, challenging behavior goes down and it creates an X on a graph. Because if I can ask you for a cookie and you'll give it to me, I don't have to fling myself on the floor. So can we use this information? We 100% can use this information to help anyone learn anything. I want to teach somebody a triple Salchow to be in the Olympics. I can use this 3-term contingency to help you to learn it. But the big question is, what do we actually have control over? And for parents, I can tell you this was the most enlightening part for me, because I was focused on the behavior. I was watching my son's behavior. I was concerned about my son's behavior. I didn't know what to do about it. I felt powerless over things that he was doing that could potentially hurt him, right? Here's the big takeaway, is that we don't have a whole lot of control over how people behave. People are going to be people. We just had a flood here the other day, and the technicians were telling me water goes where water wants to go, right? And I was like, what? But, you know, there's some truth to that. Water's going to go where water's going to go. But you can steer water different ways, right? And we can steer behavior different ways, because I may not have control over behavior, but often I have a great deal of control over antecedents, and often I have a great deal of control over consequences. Sometimes I have more control over the antecedent and less over the consequence, and sometimes I have a lot of control over the consequence and not the antecedent. Let's do an example here. That the example I always love to give, and I've given it before on the show, I apologize, but it's so clear in my mind. I took my son to the doctor's office, and we had to sit and wait a long time. They didn't have a TV in the doctor's office. It was broken or something. They had magazines, but he wasn't going to watch a magazine. And we're sitting there waiting, and I'm nervous to go to the doctor's appointment. And my son is sitting there, and he starts to hit his leg against the metal of the bottom of the chair. Just kick the bottom of the chair, and it makes a nice little ring to it, right? So it's something for him to do. And I'm like, stop that, right? I immediately want to take control of this behavior and I want him to stop it. And now, he's been bored and now I'm flipping out. So this is interesting to him. So is he going to stop it? No. He continues to bang on the chair. And I'm like, what do I do? Do I pick him up and walk out of the office? Do I, sit and hold his legs and make him not hit the chair? Like sometimes people are trying to deal with behavior in that way. It's not useful. How effective is it? It's not. And it's very frustrating and your blood pressure starts to go up. And now the little old lady who's sitting across the room, she's giving me the stink eye like, you're a bad parent. You don't know how to handle your kid, right? Isn't that the crap that we've been taught? You don't know how to handle your kid. And eventually I was so flustered and I probably, said things to my son that looking back, I'm like, that not effective and not good for his self-esteem. But eventually we got taken into the doctor's office and the moment was over. So I start ABA and ABA says, well, let's look at what the behavior was. The behavior, you're sitting in a room where he's got literally nothing to do, nothing to focus on, and he started to entertain himself. And as soon as he started to entertain, and it made a nice little ring to it when he was kicking the chair, but then I started to flip out. Now I'm the entertainment, and then the lady starts to give me the stink eye. Now both of us are good theater, right? And he's got nothing else to do. And what helped me was when our ABA team said, that's not fair. That's an unfair expectation of a little kid to sit in a doctor's office and sit still and do nothing and have nothing. We can't do that. What do we do when we're waiting in a doctor's office? Our heads are in our phone. We're playing some game or talking to somebody or looking up something. Could we just sit there in the doctor's office? We'd be uncomfortable. We'd be bored. Why do we have the expectation that a child could do that? It wasn't fair. And the question was posed, what can you change to make it more fair for him? And my mother made me this zipper bag and we put toys in it. Wind-up toys, because that's what my son liked. We weren't going to put, Barbie dolls in there because that's not what he was into. It has to be specific to the individual. He liked wind-up toys. And his attention span was like a minute and a half at that point. And that's how long it took. You wind up the toy, and then you put it on the thing, and there was the one little monkey that would jump backwards. He loved it. And that would last for about a minute and a half. And then, what he was taught was he could give me back the monkey. We put the monkey back in the bag and we take out another wind-up toy. This makes it fair. This is an antecedent modification, which makes it so he doesn't need to engage in the behavior that was challenging to me. And there needs to be no consequence, right? The consequence of the antecedent was he was happy. So that's an example of how you can manipulate something depending on what the need was that they wanted. He was bored. He wanted something to focus on. I could give that to him. Okay, let's go on to the next slide here. Okay, let's look at this example here that we have an ABC here that mom asks Bobby to pick up his toys. And Bobby throws a tantrum. And grandma, the consequence of that is grandma says, oh, poor Bobby, don't cry. And she gives him a cookie and tells him to calm down. I have lived this example. I don't know about the rest of you, right? This seems like a pretty normal day in a normal household, except ABA says, what do we teach Bobby? If we teach Bobby, mommy says to Bobby, pick up your toys, and he throws a little tantrum, and grandma gives him a cookie, and he gets out of doing it, do we think that Bobby has learned tantruming works for me or tantruming doesn't work for me? Is he likely to tantrum again when mom asks him to do something he doesn't want to do? Sure, because Bobby's smart. Bobby understands, I don't want to do it, and so to get out of it, I can throw a tantrum, but I'm going to get a cookie from it, so, it takes a little energy to throw a tantrum, but I got out of the thing and I got the cookie. Of course Bobby's going to do it again. Could we change something here? Absolutely we can change something here. First of all, we can go to grandma and say, no. If Bobby's throwing a tantrum, you're not going to give him a reward for that. And grandma's going to about that and go, whatever. But we don't want her rewarding a tantrum. But also we could change something in the antecedent too, and mom can say to Bobby, because, think about it this way. When you go to work, do you expect to get paid? Something that's meaningful to you, your paycheck? Of course you do. I know people hate this because they say that it's transactional, but all of life is transactional. All of life is. Your life is, unless you're totally volunteering, but you're also getting something out of it if you're volunteering, right? You're getting something out of the things that you do over and over again. So mom says to Bobby, maybe Bobby's nonverbal, so mom shows a picture of picking up the toys, and she says, first we're going to pick up the toys, and then you're going to get a cookie. When the toys are done being picked up, you're going to get a cookie. Now, Bobby's got an incentive to pick up the toys, and he might have to be reminded of that. But if Bobby throws a tantrum, mom just busies herself with something else, and then, if he calms down a little, she says, remember, when you're done picking up the toys, you get the cookie. Is Bobby more likely to pick up the toys without a tantrum? Yes, he is. I can tell you that that works. We'll talk about an extinction burst in a second. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So Dr. Phil always says, what's the payoff? The reason for the behavior in ABA is called the function of the behavior, but Dr. Phil always says, if somebody's doing something and they're doing it over, look at that. Dr. Phil is talking ABA to you, and we didn't know. But yes, Dr. Phil teaches ABA and says there's a reason for the behavior. So here's the fun thing that maybe nobody's ever told you before, that for most of our kiddos, there are 4 main reasons why they do something. And sometimes it's a mix of things, but the big one that is often the culprit is they're doing things for attention. The second one is they're doing things in order to get access to someone or something. They call that a tangible, but it's access to something. I want a cookie, I'm going to throw the tantrum. They do things to escape from someone or something. And that can be a sensory thing or lots of different things. I don't want to take a bath, so I want to escape it. And then the last one is the hardest one. It's called automatic reinforcement, and it's when something feels good on the inside, or it takes away something that feels bad on the inside. But we really call this the inside job, and this is where all the sensory stuff is. So, why do our kids flap their hands? Millions of reasons why, and it's different for each one of them. But we need to understand that it is filling a need for that individual. For some kiddos, they tell us when they have the words to tell us, when I do this, I see colors, and it's cool, I'm bored. For some people, they tell us the motion of this and what it does to my eyes helps me to calm down. For other people, it's like, it feels good. It feels like when we go like this, it's the equivalent of that for them. This is not to be poo-pooed. This is serious stuff. They're telling us through their communication, I need this, right? And so if you're working with somebody who's doing ABA who says, well, we need to get rid of that stimming, walk the other way. That's not what it's about. If they're asking, what's the function of that? And they should be asking, okay, so there's a need there, but is this preventing them from doing anything that we really want for them in their future? Like, for instance, you can't write your name if you're having to do this 24/7. So the question becomes, how much do we need for them to be able to hold a pencil? And if that's important for their trajectory in the future, or to be able to type, or to do any of the things that you do with your hands, if you're having to do this all the time, you won't be able to do that. And then we ask questions, right? But then there becomes the need to fulfill this maybe in many different ways. That sometimes you do this, and sometimes you're doing something completely different that doesn't take away your hands. We teach replacement behaviors. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk about Bobby this time. So mommy asks Bobby to pick up his toys, but tells him there will be a treat when he's done. We already kind of went over this example. Bobby picks up his toys, and mommy praises Bobby and gives him the treat. Is he likely to do this again? Yeah, he is, especially if this happens on a regular basis. Bobby begins to learn, picking up my toys is worth it, and mom praises me. We always want to be pairing praise, because praise is not important to our kids in the beginning. But if we pair praise with good things, eventually our kids are like, hey, that means you're telling me that you like me and that I'm doing good. Good for self-esteem. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so there are some things to ask yourself before you intervene on a challenging behavior. Is it really a challenging behavior? I think that we go on both sides of this as parents. There are some things that we go, oh, that's going to look weird, and we get afraid of it and think it's a challenging behavior, when we need to be like, I think people can get over the fact that it looks different. And I'm not going to call it weird, and I'm not going to allow people to stigmatize my child, right? There are some things that aren't challenging behaviors, that are self-stimulatory behaviors, and we all engage in those. So we want to be careful that we're not intervening on something that doesn't need to be intervened. We're intervening, it's a challenging behavior when it's preventing them from doing things that are important to them. We always want to be thinking about what's happening before the behavior, because sometimes there's environmental things. We always want to be thinking about what's the result of the behavior. What did they get out of doing the behavior? Did they get attention? Then they're going to do it again. But here's a big question. When they're doing the behavior, what is it you think they want? Remember, all behavior is communication. So what is it that you think that they wanted? If they had the words to say to you, what I really want is this, what would those words say? And is there another way that we can help them to get what they want? Because ultimately that's what it's about. They wanted something. We want to help them to get to the thing they wanted. But we want them to not hurt themselves or anybody else in the process of doing that. But we have to ask ourselves, as the people who love these individuals, have we taken the time to appropriately teach them how to get what they need and want? So, in the example of the baby who's crying to get their needs met, right? Have we taken the time and given the opportunity to this person to learn how to ask for it in a different way, which might be speech, it might be an approximation of saying, and that in the beginning we go, yep, that's close enough to cookie to get you a cookie. It might be that pointing is enough. It might be pointing to a picture is enough, right? But we have to give them a feasible, functional communication way to request the cookie before we can expect them to stop tantruming. We need to be fair, and we need to treat them like a person who's on a path to learning. And we always, we're looking at those antecedents and consequences, but we always teach a replacement behavior. If they're doing this, it's because there is a need. We don't just cancel that need out. That's not the ticket. That is not good ABA. ABA says there's a need there. That behavior has a function which makes it important. If it's not really serving the child to do it 24/7, let's teach them 5 other ways that they can get the same need met and help them to strengthen being able to get that met in other ways. We don't ever just say, well, get over it, you don't get to have that. I love that about ABA. And people who are just saying that has to go, that's not good ABA. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so let's play a little game here. And we'll say Bobby is biting. So we got our 4 suspects here. Is it for attention? Is it for access to someone or something? Is it escape from someone or something? Or does it just feel good? Why is Bobby biting? And we'll go on to the next slide. Isn't it tempting to guess? We don't know Bobby. We're not there. We didn't look at what the antecedents and the consequences were, but it's so tempting to guess. Guess what? It could have been any of those things. People bite for all of those reasons. I want you to think about your car. When your car is making a noise, do you take it to the, first of all, do you just start ripping stuff out yourself without being a mechanic? Probably not. Or do you take it to the garage and go, it's the water pump, please remove the water pump? No, you don't do that. What happens? You take it to the garage, and what do they say at the garage? They go, oh, what's it doing? They ask you, and you say, oh, it's making this noise, but it only does it when it's cold. You know, you tell them all the details, right? And then do they just listen to you and go, oh, it's definitely the water pump? No, they don't ever do that. They're experts. What do? They get in the car, they take it for a test drive, and they open it up, and they look at things, and they run it, and they have somebody else put the gas pedal, and they go, okay, I see what it's doing now, right? They do a whole assessment, but it starts with asking you questions. That's what we do when it's a car, because we want the car to be safe, and we don't want to waste money and time. I just want to say, in the things that you care about, if I said to you, what do you care more about, your car or your child? I'm confident you're going to say your child, right? And it's the same exact thing. When your child is engaged in a behavior, it's so tempting to guess. And I will tell you, the longer you play with this, the better you'll get at it. But if it's something really serious, and especially as you're beginning to use ABA as a teaching tool, it's really important that you have an expert look at this. And by the way, what they do, we can go on to the next slide, they do something that's called an FBA. It's not the FBI. I was always confused about that. It's a functional behavior assessment. It's almost identical to what you do when you take your car to the garage. First, they're going to ask you, so you tell me what's happening. And they're going to ask you all kinds of questions, just like the car mechanic did. And then they're going to say, okay, we're going to try to see, we're going to observe the child and see, does it happen in this circumstance? Does it happen in this circumstance? And there's a whole process that they go through, just like the mechanic, that's an FBA. Now, usually they do this, and it's an expert who's called a BCBA. And they look at the before and after. They take everything in the environment into account. They figure out what the function of the behavior is. And then once you know what the behavior or the function is, there's so much science that says this is the way that's effective to deal with this. And based on that, they'll create a behavior intervention plan that should be fair to the child. It should have an antecedent modification, a consequence strategy, and a replacement behavior. When your kid goes to school and if they're engaging in a behavior and they send home the note, you should ask for, if it's happened more than once, you should ask for an FBA, and you should have a behavior intervention plan meeting, and it should have those three components: an antecedent modification, a consequence strategy, and a replacement behavior. That's how we effectively steer behavior in another direction, but it has to be fair to the individual. It has to take into account, first and foremost, what was the need for the behavior? And there is a need for the behavior. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so let's play the game again. Bobby's biting. And they did an FBA, and the FBA revealed that Bobby is biting whenever mom gets on the phone. And as soon as mom scolds him, he stops biting until she gets back on the phone. So which one of the four usual suspects do you think Bobby wants? What's he looking for? Let's go on to the next slide. Well, the FBA says it's attention. You may have guessed attention. Bobby wants his mom's attention, and he doesn't know how else to get it. So she gets on the phone, and he bites her to get her attention. And even when she's scolding him, that's attention. Getting negative attention, like somebody saying you're being very bad right now, is a form of attention. So the intervention for this is that they're going to teach Bobby an appropriate way to ask for mom's attention by tapping on her shoulder or saying excuse me. There's a million different ways, right? But they're going to teach him one of those ways to start. He's also taught how to wait for attention, that maybe he's not going to, and he's rewarded for waiting. In the beginning, they wait for 10 seconds and then he gets his reward. Good waiting. And they build that and build that and build that until Bobby can wait for the 5 minutes that mom has to be on the phone. So eventually, Bobby comes up to his mom and taps her on the shoulder while she's on the phone. And mom turns around and says, oh, thank you for, asking for my attention. I'm going to be with you in 3 minutes or whatever it is. And Bobby knows that he's going to wait, but when the 3 minutes is over, he's going to get that attention. So the antecedent modification is mom. Also, we're going to build into this that mom gives him lots of attention beforehand and gives him something fun to do while she's on the phone so that he's not necessarily looking for her during that time. And the consequence strategy is that mom only gives attention when he's not biting. So if he comes up to her and taps on her during the phone call, even though it disrupts the phone call, she's going to say, excuse me a minute, cover the thing and say, hi, Bobby, what's going on? What do you need? And then she'll say to him, I'll be with you in just a minute, okay? And good waiting and all those things. And she praises him and gets back on the phone. But if Bobby comes up and bites her, then mom does not stand there and go, Bobby, why are you biting me? Because that's attention. If Bobby attempts to bite her, mom's going to be taught how to block that so that he can't bite her. And she's going to move away from him so that he does not have access to her. And she will not give attention. She'll get off the phone, right, and go do something And then we'll go back to teaching, not in that moment, another time, right? But she will not give him the attention. It's hard. That's hard. But it's just like feeding a fire. You don't want to give it oxygen. And giving him the attention, even giving him the stink eye for biting her, we don't want that. We want to starve this behavior that he's learned. I bite you, I get attention. We want to starve it from attention. Right there. Okay, go on to the next one. We'll play another game here. Same story, Bobby's biting, but this time with this child, the FBA reveals that Bobby is biting his brother whenever his brother is playing with his Buzz Lightyear figure. What do we think the reason is? What do we think that Bobby wants? He's communicating the way that he knows how to. Go on to the next one for us. And what Bobby is showing us is that he wanted the Buzz Lightyear. He wanted access to someone or something. He wants the toy. He doesn't know how to appropriately ask for it and get it, right? So he knows if he bites his brother is going to scream, drop the doll, run and go tell on him, but he gets the doll for a couple of seconds. And sometimes that's enough. That's enough. And he learns it's okay to bite somebody, and next he'll bite somebody at school. Sally's holding the ball, he'll bite her so that she drops the ball because he wins. So the intervention, they're going to teach Bobby how to appropriately ask for a toy and how to wait and how to share. The antecedent modification is that mom or whoever is taking care gives Bobby something fun to play with while his brother is playing with Buzz Lightyear. And the consequence strategy is that the caregiver gives Bobby a big reward for sharing. He is not given access to Buzz if he bites. So if he bites his brother, and we want to be keeping an eye on this situation, right? We're not just going to willy-nilly let the brother be playing with Buzz Lightyear and hope it turns out okay. We're not going to go get on the phone during that, right? We're going to stand right there and watch. Brother gets Buzz Lightyear, and if Bobby is playing nicely with his toy, eventually we're going to reward that and say, okay, now share and switch, right? So that Bobby gets access to the toy. But if at any point Bobby goes to bite the brother, first of all, we would try to block that. We're not into letting children be bit. But now we would take the brother and give all the attention. If he gets bit, the brother's going to get all the attention and he gets to keep Buzz Lightyear. Now, is Bobby going to freak out? You betcha. Because he's going to be like, excuse me, this always worked before. How come I'm not getting what I want? Why am I not getting what I want? I said I wanted that. I bit and it's always worked before. Why am I not getting it? That's called an extinction burst. I don't know if that's the next slide or not, but let's go on to the next slide. We'll do this, and then I know I've got extinction burst in here somewhere. So keep it simple, giving meaningful rewards to behaviors you want to see more of, and give the opposite of what you think they want when they're engaged in the behavior you want to see less of. Literally just be like, what do I think they want right now? And if they're throwing a tantrum, you think to yourself, okay, what do they want right now? And don't give that to them right now. You're going to figure out later on, how do I make sure that I teach them a way that they can ask for that without doing that, okay? Ask your ABA team for help. Let's go on to the next one. Let's keep going. I want to get to the, okay. This is important. We don't ever ignore children. So when I say don't give it attention, I'm not talking about ignoring the child, ever, ever. We do not ignore behavior. We do not ignore children, but we do sometimes ignore behavior. The example I always give was that my son would throw this tantrum, and the way they got me to see it is that while he was throwing the tantrum, I stayed in the room with him, but they said to me, go water the plants. And I was like, my kid is freaking out right now. And they said, he's okay. He's here with you, and I are in the room. He's not hurting himself. He's screaming, but what he wants is your attention. Water the plants. Put your focus someplace else. Right? So I'm not ignoring my child, but I'm ignoring this behavior. And it was life-changing. It was life-changing. It was hard, you guys. I'm so glad I had somebody to talk me through it. But don't ignore your child. Busy yourself with something else. You know, your child drops the F-bomb. And if you find that they're doing it for attention, you make no reaction. You just sit and look at your phone. And what will they do? They'll do an extinction burst. They'll say F, 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 F. And you stay looking at your phone. And then they get tired. They're like, oh, well, that's not working. And they stop doing it. So let's talk about the extinction burst. I don't care if it's not on the next slide. If we have learned, it is on the next slide here. If we have learned that if I scream, you give in to me, then I will do that forever and a day. And if you change the rules on me and I scream and you don't give in to me, I literally go, what the heck happened? Let's go back to the example of the light. I am used to walking into my house and turning on the light switch, and light comes on. I'm conditioned to that. I have an expectation that I'm going to get that reward. So what happens when I come in one day and I turn on the light switch and lights don't come on? Because that happens sometimes. And I understand intellectually that the light is burned out. But in the moment, behaviorally, what do? And I think a lot of people do this. I stand there and flick the light switch up and down. In disbelief, I'm like, what the heck? My mind rejects what I know, that the light is burnt out. And I'm like, maybe if I flick it up and down enough times, it'll come back on. That's called an extinction burst. It is when you are so used to getting what you want that you will continue doing the behavior and escalate the behavior when you don't get what you want in disbelief. It takes the mind and the body several minutes to realize, it's not working. Now I got to go do something else. Your kids will be that way too. If every time they've thrown a tantrum, grandma gave them a cookie, then they're going to throw a tantrum, and when grandma doesn't give them a cookie, they're going to go, hey, I must need to throw a bigger tantrum. It's really hard when that happens. When you're trying to do something that's an intervention and instead you get twice as much challenging behavior, I want you to focus on doing this with experts, but also recognizing you have to keep your child safe in the moment, right? So if they're throwing a big tantrum, that you make sure that you push furniture back, whatever, but that we don't give in to the challenging behavior. We always say, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but the good news is when the extinction burst is happening, it is a sign to you that you got the function right. And they are saying, excuse me, this has always worked before. It really is revisiting the terrible twos in this microcosm moment, right? Tells you that you're on the right track. And the other thing is, they call it the bad news. I also call it, it's just the reality of it is you got to follow through. If you give in, then what the child learns is, I just have to throw a bigger tantrum. This is really hard. But when the kids get it, they get it, boom. And then that behavior is often over forever. And it's life-changing. My son used to hit his head on the kitchen floor. And, they had to help me to get through that moment and not feed it. Because my response to when he would hit his head on the kitchen floor is I would scoop him up, rub his head, take him to a big rocking chair, rock him, tell him I loved him, and give him lemonade in a sippy cup. And I did not realize, because I thought that was good parenting. My child hit his head on the kitchen floor and I'm taking care of him, right? What I didn't realize was that in his mind, in his little 3-year-old mind, he was like, I don't want to do what she's asking me to do. And if I hit my head on the kitchen floor, she'll be really nice to me and give me lemonade. Now, that's not the equation I wanted to be fostering, but I was. And when they helped me to get through the extinction burst, it was, woo, right? But he learned that that was not going to happen anymore. And he stopped hitting his head on the kitchen floor instantly. So hang on. If you're seeing the extinction burst, hang on. Talk to yourself, say good things to yourself, know that you love your child, and make sure that your child is not injuring themselves or anybody else, right? Safety is paramount. And let them throw their fit. They are unhappy about the fact that you changed the rules. But it's okay to change the rules. Telling them that you have to hit your head on the kitchen floor for me to be nice to you and give you lemonade is not a rule we want, right? Okay, moving on. So and I know we've gone over, and I'm going to go a couple of more minutes over because I think there's some really important things in these next few slides. So in ABA, there are different things that they will use at different times. Lots of tools, and I'm not going over all the tools right now. But one of the tools that there's video of that people see and they watch their child getting ABA and they go, oh, this looks really weird, If it's looking weird, it's probably DTT. DTT is that discrete trial training. We talked about this extensively yesterday. It's when you're teaching something and you isolate it from the real world. You literally take a task that you're trying to learn and you slice it away from the world and bring it to a place where that's the only input that's happening. And we do this with everything, right? We do this with dancing. We talked about salsa yesterday, about how in the dance studio they take you over in the corner and they have the little footprints on the floor. That's DTT. There's no music playing. We're just gonna go through the basics of it, the rudimentary things. You learn how to ski, you don't learn on the big hill. You go to the side, and in the shop, you're learning how to put the skis on and point the skis inward. Because we're keeping the learning really specific to get some strong basics. It looks bizarre, but it really works at the beginning of teaching a new skill. But it cannot be everything. I always say that, sometimes I've heard people refer to ABA and DTT as being the same thing. They are not. If you did SAT analogies, I always say ABA is to DTT what car is to steering wheel, right? A steering wheel is a part of a car. It is not the whole car. You're going to Vegas and you're going to drive. You're not going to just take the steering wheel. That would be crazy. You would not get to Vegas. If you're just doing DTT, you are not going to get where you want to get with ABA. It is just like if you're skiing and you never leave the shop, then you're not really skiing. Or if you only are doing the 1, 2, 3 with the footprints on the floor with no music, you're not really dancing, right? It is the basic beginning skill to make things clear. And so the example I always use at ABA is when they say to kids, touch car, right? And you go, oh, it just looks so weird and it sounds weird. Except what we're teaching the child is that's a car. And when you put your hand on it, you're touching the car. And now I can teach you a whole bunch of other things. I can teach you, I can put a car here and I can put these two things here and I can say touch car. And now a car is not a cup of water and it's not a Kleenex box. Okay, and then I can teach you other things, right? You're learning how to discriminate that this is different than this. So it looks weird. It is weird, but it's just a beginning skill to teach a lot of times for language, but other things as well. If I'm going to learn Russian, right, and somebody just stands there and says blah, 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 in Russian, I'm not going to get it, right? But if somebody picks up the Kleenex box and says, dushta, making it up, I don't know what the Russian word for it is, dushta, but then I know, oh, dushta is this. That is a form of DTT. I'm isolating it from the environment so that there's no doubt in your mind that this is a Kleenex box and this word means that. That is literally how they begin to teach language to people who have a deficit in language by doing DTT with them. But if it's the only thing, they don't really learn how to have a conversation, right? So it cannot be the only thing. Okay, now, if you're teaching something that's difficult to learn, you may start with DTT, but you very quickly, and I don't mean weeks later, I mean same day, 3 minutes later. So we it might be with a kiddo on the spectrum that, we would say touch Kleenex, right? And they touch the Kleenex box. Now, we'd do a couple of trials of that so that they're really getting it and not confusing it with something else. But then we would go play for a couple of minutes. And in the course of play, I would say, oh, can you get me the Kleenex box? I need a Kleenex, right? And put it in the natural environment. Natural environment training, it looks like fun. It's absolutely essential. It has to be there after the DTT. If you are getting no natural environment training from your ABA, fire them. Your kiddo, but if you're also getting no DTT, it's a problem. Because if your kiddo was capable of learning language without ABA, without DTT, if they were capable of just picking it up from the environment, you probably wouldn't get the diagnosis of autism. Your child wasn't able to just absorb it at the level that you needed it to be taught. So by just putting them in the natural environment, creates an environment in which, like when I'm learning Russian and don't know that it's a Kleenex box, I'm being bombarded by things and I can't sort them out. Which one means a Kleenex box? So especially if you have a young kiddo and they're not doing TTT, I say fire them too. You need some DTT in the beginning, and it needs to go right into NET, and then you need to take it out into the world, right? So absolutely critical. But there are other things too that they will do with your child, other things that you will hear. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm out of order in terms of my slides here. So let's talk about generalization and maintenance first, and then we'll talk about some of the other teaching techniques. You want your child to learn a whole bunch of things, and there's no way that there's not enough time to teach them everything that they need to learn, even if they're 2. Right? When you think about how many words there are and how many things there are and how many different things there are, it becomes overwhelming very quickly. I have a picture of a toilet there because I love to talk about generalization and give the example of toilet training, but it's really everything, right? So whenever you're teaching something, you have to plan for generalization from the beginning. Excuse me, it's one of the hallmarks of a good ABA program. If they're sitting there and saying to your child, okay, one of the things we're going to teach your child is X. If they don't say it, you should ask, how are we planning for generalization? And if they immediately come back and go, oh, what a great question, we're going to do this, this, and this to plan for generalization, you know you're getting good quality ABA. It's a hallmark of good quality ABA. If they're like, I would have big concerns. Because what we see, especially like, let's just take the toilet training. So, you know, we do the toilet training and we usually pick one potty to start it in. And that's the potty that we're going to go to. And the child we've got all the books and everything set up in there and our timer and everything and our reinforcers there. But as soon as that child has it pretty regularly on that toilet, I mean, like, you know, one day they've got it pretty solidly, then we try to take them to another bathroom, which might be your upstairs bathroom or your downstairs bathroom or your friend across the street's bathroom or your mother-in-law's bathroom across town, but we want to take them into another bathroom. We do not want them to get stuck on this bathroom experience is just in this room. Because all toilets are slightly different, right? They have some components that are the same, but they're all slightly different. I am heartsick whenever one of you writes in and says, we went on vacation and my child didn't poop for 10 days because we weren't at home. That did not have to happen. That was bad generalization. Someone wasn't minding the store there. So we start with the downstairs bathroom, do the upstairs bathroom, do the one across town, and then we go to Target. Because Target's bathroom is vastly different than a home bathroom. And then once we've gone to the bathroom at Target, we go to Trader Joe's bathroom, right? So that they learn, oh, this bathroom experience is not just this room, and each one is a little different, but here are the things that it has in common. Well, we do this with everything. Stop and think about it. If you're teaching the concept of the color red, there are lots of different colors of red, right? And there's no way in the time that we have that we can teach absolutely every iteration of red. I'm sure I don't know every iteration of red, but I have the ability to see red. So basically, and understand, oh, that's red. Oh, that's a brick red, and that's a pale red, and that's an orange red, and that's, that's a ruby red, right? That's a cherry red, but I know it's red, right? So what we need to do is not just work on things in a rigid way, but give them lots of opportunities so that really what we're doing is helping them to learn how to learn. And when we get to generalization, it's when the child or the teen or the adult is able to learn something that we didn't expressly teach them. That they get to the point, and this happens with language, where we've taught a whole bunch of language, we taught them how to use the language, we gave them lots of opportunities, and now they start using language in a way that we did not get around to teaching them yet. It's pretty fabulous. It's a wonderful thing. The other thing is maintenance. A lot of our children regress, so we can teach them a skill, they master it. We have to make sure that we maintain that, which means every once in a while we revisit it to make sure that they're maintaining the skill. Okay, go ahead on to the next slide. So lots of different teaching techniques. We prompt. Sometimes there's physical prompts, and there's a whole array of those. There's textural prompts, vocal prompts, all different kind of prompts to help them to be successful to get to the reinforcement in the beginning. Remember that the focus is always how quickly can I get them to a reward that's meaningful for them. Now, stop and consider. If somebody was doing something that was torturous, how does that fit with trying to get to a reinforcer? This is why I'm so sad that people have started associating ABA with negative things when it's about being reinforcing. We use a technique called chaining, which is that if there's a big, long chain of skills that you need to be able to do something like brushing your teeth, you don't have to be able to do the whole thing to get to a reinforcer. You only have to do one part of it, and we'll do the rest of it for you. But then you'll get a reinforcer for the part that you did, and the next time we come to do it, we'll teach you the next part of it. So now you have two parts of the skill. And then eventually we put in a third one, and we're giving you reinforcers for being able to do it until you're able to do the whole skill by yourself. It's a really effective way of teaching something that's a difficult task. All kinds of things using pivotal response, behavior momentum, man training, so many more that we could get into, but we're way past time. But these are techniques that they use to help your child to learn to keep things fresh, to lead them to success. I didn't even have errorless learning on that. That in the beginning, we make sure that there's no potential for them to make a mistake, that they're always getting it right, so that they see this is kind of fun. This is very fun. Okay, on to the next one. So I started by showing you those three columns, the 47% and the middle one and the last one. And I said most of us, if we were honest, we would say we'd like to be in the 47% where our kids don't need support. So the research is in, and they've found three very specific things that are there when kids are doing well. These are predictors of success. I call it the recipe for success. And number one is lots and lots of opportunity to learn. Our kids need more opportunity than other kids, but then they can learn. So you probably have a prescription for ABA, and you should do the full amount. And you should learn how to do it so that when you're at home, it's that every waking hour thing. It isn't just 40 hours, it's every waking hour. But the question is, how many of those hours do you want an expert to do? And you should do all of them that you can and have somebody else pay for that. And insurance doesn't like for you to know that. It costs them a lot of money. But I'm here to tell you this is part of the predictor of success. But the second one is caregiver involvement, which if you think about it goes directly to number one too, because if your child is there and getting 40 hours and then you take them home and you know how to do it, then they're getting every waking hour. If you are a parent who is like, I just can't do it, I want them to do it at the center, it's clear that the outcomes are not as good every waking hour. And then the third predictor is that you're working with a team that has an experienced BCBA, because these folks have been there and done that, and they've worked with lots of kiddos, and they see shortcuts, and they go, I've seen this before. There's lots of different kinds of autism, and with experience, they grow to understand this and say, I've seen this before with this child. The most effective path from here to here is to teach them this skill next. And that's a real thing. So having experienced BCBA is such a part of the recipe for success. Do we have another slide? It has to be fair. Oh my goodness. You have to consider the child's medical state and their medical needs. You can't be asking somebody to do something that they're not capable of doing right now. You can help them to learn the first little part of that skill and help them to feel rewarded and self-esteem from that, but you shouldn't be teaching an 18-year-old skill level to a 2-year-old, right? And that sounds crazy, but sometimes people are trying to teach something that isn't possible, right? Or that the child medically is not in a place that they can learn that. It has to be fun for the child. If it is not fun for the child, it is not being done properly. The child's sensory needs and sensitivities have to be taken into consideration. We had this discussion yesterday. You're not going to take a child into a bright room where they can't see anything and try to teach them algebra. That would be insane. But sometimes we think that our sensory level is their sensory level. Listen and watch and hear them and see how they are reacting. They are communicating with you with their behavior. And if they're starting to get anxious, often there's something going on sensory-wise that's making it difficult for them. Take that into consideration. The child's learning strengths and deficits have to be considered. We play to strengths, we shore up deficits. We don't punish deficits. That's not the way to teach. And there has to be a benefit to the child now and in the future. So if you're trying to teach a child how to write their name with a pencil, they don't care about that. They don't give a flying fig about that. It's really important for them, for their future, to know their name and to be able to write it. I think we can all agree that that's a great skill to be able to have, right? It may not be the be-all, end-all, and we certainly aren't going to torture a child to get them to do it. But can we change an antecedent and change a consequence to make it more rewarding for them to do it? Sure, we can pair some kind of reinforcer with it that is really meaningful to the child. I love the BCBA that whenever her children were doing homework, that's the only time she allowed them to have Kool-Aid. She upped the stakes on the homework. Homework doesn't feel good to anybody, and it wasn't meaningful to them then. Now they're in college, but it wasn't meaningful to them then, and she wanted to make it meaningful for them, so she upped the stakes and put an antecedent modification and said, here's the pitcher of Kool-Aid. You can have as much Kool-Aid as you can hold while you're doing your homework, right? We can make it fair for them. You want your life to be fair, it has to be fair for these kiddos. We have to give them a meaningful reason to want to do this. And if we don't, shame on us, but we aren't doing good ABA. Do I have one more slide? I don't think so. Is there? No? It's the ABA basics. Okay, great. So anyway, those are the basics of ABA. I hope I have put some of your fears aside and helped you to know what you're looking for your ABA programs. If you need to be on a waiting list to get ABA, get on the waiting list. Please call your insurance and say, though, if you're paying for insurance, say, if you've waited more than 30 days, call them and say, I've been waiting more than 30 days, and this is a denial of access to care. I want ABA. Make sure you're getting the right intensity for the person so that they get enough opportunities for it to not be frustrating, but they're actually learning. I always referred to it as the autism miracle in my living room. It didn't change my child. Can I be really abundantly clear? My child is still exactly who he was, but it allowed him to say what he wanted to say. It allowed him to tell us what he was thinking, what he wanted, what he needed. My child did not want to hold a pencil. It was the thing he did not want to do more than anything else. We had to make it more and more reinforcing for him. My son is now a junior in college, and he says he's studying writing. He wants to be a screenwriter and a television writer, and he says to me, I'm a writer. That's who I am. I don't want us to ever give up on our kiddos. We don't ever give up. They're worth the effort to help them to learn. But if we don't make it fair for them to learn, we have not done our jobs. Make it fair, give them the opportunity, and watch them flourish. Be excited about who they are. Don't ever be confused. We don't need to change any of these kids. If you learn a new skill, if you were to go out today and say, I'm going to learn rock climbing, it does not change who you are, right? But if somebody is mean to you while they're teaching you rock climbing, that absolutely can change who you are. And there is no place for that in ABA, none whatsoever. I just so appreciate you taking the time to be with me and talk about this and learn about this. Please write in any questions that you might have. Sending you love. And we're going to be back on Monday with more shows. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.